"What are you doing here?" She didn't say it, but her stare shouted it loud enough. My younger sister, Haley, stood under a wash of glittering lights and clinking wine glasses, glowing like she ruled all of Scottsdale. Her silver dress caught every reflection, every stare. She was the center of gravity, her engagement party, her fantasy, her carefully curated kingdom. And me? I was just the older sister, always the observer, the one who didn't fit the vibe. My name's Vanessa Reed. I'm 40. I've put corrupt CEOs behind bars with airtight arguments and a steady tone. But none of that ever counted where it mattered most, inside the private tribunal called my family, where verdicts were based on charm, not truth. I walked in solo, black cocktail dress, minimal makeup, no accessories, just sharp lines and intention. I wasn't here to blend in. I was here to be unmistakably deliberate. As I moved toward the bar, she noticed. Her smile was as polished as it was poisonous. Haley leaned into her inner circle, whispered behind a manicured hand. They laughed, some glancing at me with amused pity, others with passive dismissal. I've watched men sentenced to life with more grace than they offered me in that moment. But what none of them realized, least of all her, was that I didn't come here to be tolerated. I came to be seen, fully, finally. I came because I was done being overlooked. I wouldn't need to shout. When the time came, one truth, sharp and quiet, would be enough to cut through every polished lie in that room. Ever stood in a room full of people who share your DNA and still felt like an outsider on probation? If that's you, I see you. Respect earned the hard way hits different. I believed if I just kept my head down, followed the rules, and made no noise, they'd eventually see me. But here's the truth. Some people only notice you when you stop making yourself convenient. Growing up, Haley was everyone's favorite show. She lights up every room, they'd say. In reality, she just mastered how to make herself the main act, and I was the background. Ink on my hands, books in my bag, volunteering to help the teacher clean up, because the classroom was less brutal than the lunchroom. I wasn't timid, I was focused, observing every crack in the family portrait. But they just called me quiet, like it was a defect. My parents weren't malicious, they just didn't know what to do with a daughter who dissected legal ethics instead of dance routines. I asked the wrong questions at the wrong time and wouldn't fake a grin just to keep dinner smooth. That made me the problem. Haley bombed a trig quiz and got frozen yogurt. I brought home a 98 in AP Chem and heard, "So what happened to the other 2 points?" It wasn't jealousy, it was erasure. At 13, she trashed my best hoodie with grape soda. When I asked for an apology, she called me dramatic and rolled her eyes like I was exhausting. At 15, I won state in debate. Dad bailed. Haley had a last-minute audition for a student film she never finished. At 17, I got into Stanford early. Mom blinked and said, "Wow, that's far. You sure you'll be okay out there?" I once overheard her tell our neighbor, "Vanessa's just intense. But Haley, she knows how to live." Like my discipline was some kind of clinical condition. In our house, charm trumped depth. Loud won over logic. And if you didn't perform joy, you were called the downer. By the time we hit our 20s, the verdict was in. Haley was the charming rebel, boys with bad bands, thrift store chic. I was the uptight one, the rule writer in black. I was the serious one, the planner, the girl who scanned every room for exits before she sat down. Just in case. She changed majors like phone cases, communications, marketing, then nothing. I double majored in poli-sci and legal studies, graduated summa cum laude, and got silence in return. I didn't resent Haley. Not really. I resented how often I had to shrink myself so she could shine uninterrupted. There was a Thanksgiving I'll never forget. I was 26, fresh off passing the bar, but the only thing anyone wanted to talk about was Haley's new boyfriend. A guy from LA who once did a mattress ad. He didn't even show up, yet his ghost took up more space than I did. I mentioned my new role at the DA's office. Mom gave me a tight smile. "That's great, sweetie, but let's not get too serious at dinner. It makes people tense." Haley smirked from across the table, sipping her wine like she just won something. I folded my napkin and said nothing else all night. The years blurred together. Holidays, weddings, cookouts, always with me as the unacknowledged extra, the +1 to my own lineage. Anytime someone asked what I did, Haley would leap in with her go-to script. She does legal stuff, courts or something. That was all they got. That was all she gave, and I let her. Because for years, I believed invisibility was safer than conflict. That if I stayed quiet long enough, someone would finally look up and notice me. But the danger of being invisible? One day you start fading from your own reflection. That's why I almost skipped the party. The invitation came in a gold-edged envelope that smelled like artificial jasmine and pretension. Inside, "Please join us in celebrating the engagement of Haley Reid and Jonathan Whitman." Not a single personal touch. No +1, no handwritten note. Just a lazy follow-up text a few days later. "Hey V, no pressure if you're slammed with work. Just a heads up, it's a bit formal." Jonathan's folks are all about the aesthetic, so maybe avoid anything too judgy. XO, anything too serious. That line echoed for days, like I was still the same girl in hand-me-down blazers and silent rage. In her mind, I was still the rigid one, the one who made people squirm just by existing with standards. She had no clue how far Sirius had taken me, but she was about to find out. Last time Haley asked what I'd been up to, I muttered, "Just staying busy." She nodded, half listening while doom-scrolling Instagram, probably flirting with a guy she'd forget by Monday. That's how she operated. Minimal effort, maximum spin. Haley liked stories that fit in brunch bites. Anything longer required empathy. In her eyes, my world was just beige folders and boring hearings. She didn't know the difference between a judge and a paralegal, and she didn't care to. And for a while, that worked. If no one asked, I owed no answers. It was easier that way, less disappointing, less real. But beyond family brunches and Haley's spotlight, I had a name, a presence. In courtrooms that smelled like coffee and old carpet, I was undeniable. I landed a federal clerkship in D.C. straight out of law school. My writing helped steer policy that made headlines. I tore apart white-collar schemes built on shell corporations and fake charities. They smiled like saints. I saw their teeth. I didn't just practice law, I embodied it. Late nights, courtroom whispers, prepping whistleblowers at 2 a.m., skipping Thanksgivings for closing arguments. Even men in Brioni suits called me Your Honor, without meeting my eyes. At 38, I became the youngest appointed judge in Arizona's 9th District. They ran my photo in the Scottsdale Tribune, standing alone in black robes, unreadable expression, unshakable spine. I mailed a copy to my parents. No text, no voicemail, just static. I didn't cry, not by then. Somewhere along the way, I stopped auditioning for people who never had tickets to begin with. Distance isn't the same as healing. And silence? It isn't always exile. Sometimes it's armor. Sometimes it's strategy. So when I got Haley's little invite, part of me actually laughed. She wanted me there, as long as I didn't disrupt the fantasy. She wanted the Reid name in the room, but not the depth, not the gravity I brought with it. I thought about staying home, letting her have her moment in a house of mirrors. I had a full docket in court the next morning, but something kept pulling. Not vengeance, just a need to stop disappearing, a need for clarity. After years of being miscast in my own family, maybe it was time I showed up. Not to disrupt, but to be undeniable. So I booked a last-minute flight, rented a car, and turned down the curated hotel she'd handpicked for her preferred guests. I picked the dress carefully. Nothing trendy, nothing soft. A clean black sheath, sharp enough to whisper, "I'm not here for your comfort." When I arrived at the Hilltop venue, equal parts Pinterest fantasy and old money cosplay, I handed the valet my name and walked in. No hesitation, no +1, no lipstick smile, just presence. It was exactly the scene I'd imagined. Rosé flowing like baptism. Small talk about hedge funds and Bali wedding hashtags. So much gloss. So little grit. Jonathan's parents were everything I expected. Polished, pleasant, generational wealth in pearl form. Haley was thriving. She glided across the room like she owned the lighting. Every gesture choreographed. Every OMG wrapped in lacquered charm. She was all honey and high pitch. Laughs a decibel too high. Compliments so rehearsed, I could hear the underline. I kept to the far edge. I could have easily been mistaken for a high-end caterer. Neutral dress, still posture, eyes wide open. But of course, Haley saw me. Her smile flinched for just a breath before she drifted over. "Wow, you actually came," she said, head tilt in full effect. The prelude to a subtle slap disguised as sweet. "Didn't think you'd show," she smirked. "I had space in my schedule," I said, sipping without blinking. She scanned my dress. "Black? Bold choice." I shrugged. "Keeps things centered." She gave that fake giggle. Classic Vanessa, always bringing courtroom energy. There it was. That word again. Serious. Like it's an illness. Like depth is a defect. She leaned in. "Just don't make things weird, okay? Jonathan's parents are really perception sensitive." "Then maybe they're overdue for something honest," I replied. Her smile stiffened. Just for a beat. Then she twirled off, back into the echo chamber of admiration she called home. I stood alone, not lonely, just alert. They still didn't know who I was. But they would. The gavel hadn't dropped yet. Dinner arrived in curated waves, pea-sized greens no one could name, protein plated like art school, sea bass perfumed with arrogance and citrus air. I sat near the end, hidden behind a jungle of orchids and inflated egos. I didn't come for the fillet or the fake smiles. I came to feel the final sting, one last glimpse of what it was like to vanish while standing still. Eventually, Haley drifted by with Jonathan clinging to her elbow. He nodded at me the way you'd nod at someone scanning your boarding pass. Polite, dismissive. "You're Haley's big sister, right?" he asked. "Vanessa," I corrected, calm as granite. He smiled wider. "Haley said you do government work. Admin or something?" I said nothing, just lifted my glass and let the silence blanket the room like the hush before a verdict. I gave him a calm non-answer. He nodded, satisfied in his ignorance, and turned back to Haley, who looked like she'd just slipped out of a trap without a scratch. I let it go, like I always did, until I didn't. The speeches started right after dessert. Haley stood under the chandelier's glow like she'd choreographed the lighting herself, champagne glass lifted like a crown. "I just want to say thank you," she said, sugar-dipped and rehearsed, playing to the crowd like it was opening night. Polite applause, camera flashes. Jonathan stood beside her, beaming like he'd just sealed a merger. "I know I look composed now," she said, head tilt in full display, "but I used to be wild. My sister," she pointed behind her without turning, "was the total opposite." Laughter rippled. "Once, she filed a written complaint because I borrowed her sweater. I was 13, she was 16. Drama, right?" Laughter louder now. I didn't flinch. "She's always been intense," Haley went on. Rules, boundaries, you know. But I'm so glad she came. She's not really into family stuff or smiling. She winked. They chuckled. Jonathan leaned in, grinning like he was helping. Seriously, though, glad you're here. Haley said you work in, what was it? County records? He gave me that pleasant, hollow smile, the one people wear when they think they're being generous. And there it was, the casual dismissal. Not cruel, just condescending. A smirk pretending to be civility. I set my fork down gently, dabbed the corner of my mouth, and looked him dead in the eye. Sorry, I said softly. Where did you hear that, exactly? He blinked. Oh, Haley just said, something office-y, local stuff. I nodded slowly, let the silence pull tight like piano wire. Then I smiled. Number? That's not correct. Haley let out a breathy laugh. Oh, come on, V, don't be dramatic. We're just teasing. I turned to Jonathan, voice steady. I don't work in records. I'm a judge. Silence fell. Not the pleasant kind, the kind that sucks the oxygen out of the air. A gasp. A man dropped his phone mid-scroll. Someone whispered, Wait, Judge Reed? Heads turned. Phones came up. Search engines lit with my name. A trial. A headline. A case with national reach. She handled the Mesa Tech corruption case, someone whispered. And Jonathan finally looked, really looked, like he was realizing the woman in the room wasn't a myth. You're a judge? I nodded. Superior Court, 9th District. His hand slipped from Haley's waist. Haley's lips parted, but no sentence followed. Just a noise. Half stammer, half defense. I didn't know you were still doing that, she fumbled. You never. Because you never asked, I said, calm as stone. I rose, not quickly, but with intent, folded my napkin, placed it on the china like a full stop. No need to raise my voice. The room was already listening with every pore. No theatrics, just the truth. And truth, when you don't beg people to accept it, is the loudest thing in the room. I turned and walked out, past Haley, past Jonathan, past the entire illusion. Haley, Jonathan, my parents, now just stunned witnesses in a trial they never knew was theirs. No one followed. No one objected. No excuses. No scrambling. They didn't need to say a word. The verdict had been delivered. I didn't look back. Not even when I heard my name float behind me, barely whispered, like an afterthought tossed into the wind. The air outside felt different, cooler, clearer, like the stillness after a judge says, adjourned. Justice, in whatever form it arrived, had landed. My heels crunched over gravel as I walked to the car. Every step carried weight, but for once none of it belonged to them. I sank into the driver's seat, shut the door, and let the quiet wrap around me. No playlist, no notifications, just breathe, just being. But this wasn't the silence I grew up with, the kind that twisted around dinner tables and turned compliments into coded digs. This was silence as peace, as freedom, as truth finally unburdened. Then came the buzz. Again. My phone lit up beside me. Mom, Haley, names that hadn't touched my screen in ages. Missed call from Mom. 2 texts from Haley. I let it all ring out. Then picked up the phone. Not to answer, just to observe. You should have warned me. Why would you humiliate me like that? I almost laughed, because of course it wasn't about the truth I told. It was about the image I shattered, the fiction I interrupted. They weren't embarrassed by what I said. They were embarrassed it came out. That I broke the tidy script where I stayed small and they stayed secure. And then it hit me. They didn't overlook me because I was invisible. They did it because they never bothered to look. I drove through Scottsdale like I had in college. through streets I once haunted, chasing purpose, hoping someone would claim me. Now I passed them with the stillness of someone who had built her own life, brick by intentional brick with no applause required. I remembered a night in my 20s, alone on a late bus after a ruthless deposition. No texts, no check-ins. And I told myself maybe this was the price of being serious, of being sharp instead of soft. Maybe sharp women cut themselves. But I was wrong. Being serious made me steady. Being sharp made me surgical. And being invisible? It made me see everything. Somewhere between the third traffic light and the chevron I used to hit for coffee, Mom called again. I let it ring. I didn't need her sudden curiosity. Didn't need her revisionist empathy. Not now. Not like this. I'd finally learned, just because they were finally listening didn't mean I owed them the story. The burden of visibility should never fall on the one who's been erased. That night I checked into a small inn, not the one Haley picked, but a quiet spot outside the city with no pretense and a view of the desert skyline. I kicked off my shoes, wiped the makeup clean, and stood in front of the mirror, not posing, not correcting, just being. I didn't see the uptight one, or the complicated one. I saw a woman who built every inch of her life with grit, every scar earned, every silent win, every headline they ignored. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel pride or power. I felt something better. Enough. I sat on the edge of the bed and opened Haley's texts again. You should have told me. Why would you embarrass me like that? I typed. Deleted. Typed again. Then finally. I didn't say anything untrue. You just didn't expect me to speak. I never hit send, not out of fear, but because I owed no clarity to people who never earned it. Instead, I powered down the phone and let the silence wrap around me, not like emptiness, but like armor. They'd probably spend years trying to recast me into the role that suited their comfort. But I was done contorting for their script. I flew home the next morning, no golden sunrise, no tearful exit, just engine hum, black coffee, and the calm weight of my own truth. On the surface, nothing had changed, but inside, everything had. When I landed, I didn't reach for my phone. I wasn't ready for the flood of excuses, rewrites, or half-hearted apologies. Let them sit in silence, for once, the same silence they handed me for years. I went straight to the courthouse. Monday morning, same nod from security, same docket from the clerk, same quiet, morning Judge Reed from my assistant. As if nothing happened, but something had shifted, not just in me, in the air itself. I wasn't dragging their version of me anymore. I'd laid it down. The first case was mundane, a boundary dispute over a tree and an inch of dirt no one really wanted. But I listened, fully, like I always have, even when the world didn't listen back. After I issued my ruling, an older woman in a green cardigan hovered at the edge of the bench. I just wanted to thank you, she said softly. You actually listen. Most don't. I nodded. That's the job. She shook her head. Number you see people, even the ones no one else does. I didn't move, but inside, her words landed like a second verdict, one I didn't see coming. Later, I passed the front desk and noticed a young attorney glance up from her screen, probably 26, fresh out of law school, nerves stitched into her too big blazer. Judge Reed? She asked. I turned. Her screen showed a paused video. Me, at the party. My brows rose. She flushed. Someone posted it online, she said. Just a clip. You saying, because you never asked. That line, it hit. I didn't know what to say, for once. She added, my sister's the Haley in my family, the golden child. I was just the shadow. Or I thought I was. We locked eyes. The courthouse buzzed, paper shuffles, elevator chimes, but something between us stayed still, stayed real. "You're not a shadow," I said, gently. She smiled, small, but genuine. "Neither are you," she whispered, and then she walked away. That night, I finally opened my phone. 3 from Haley, 2 from Mom, even 1 from Jonathan. "I didn't realize how little I knew about you. That wasn't fair. I see that now. You didn't deserve how I treated you." They weren't true apologies, just reflexes, panic dressed up as remorse now that the truth had spilled out where they couldn't sweep it away. But I wasn't waiting for anyone to say sorry. I wasn't clinging to some overdue nod of approval. And maybe that's why, for the first time, I didn't feel the need to explain myself. The weight I'd carried all those years, it wasn't mine, it was theirs. That night I went to bed early. No wine, no spiraling thoughts, no rewinding the moment for the 100th time. I didn't have to, because this time, the moment was enough. No one stood up for me, no one applauded, no one came running after me, apologizing through sobs. And yet, the silence afterward wasn't empty. It was clean, like moving into a home that was finally mine after years of renting rooms in someone else's life. I thought of Haley then, what she must have felt when the laughter at her party slowed, when eyes turned and phones began to glow with curiosity. Was it shame, embarrassment, or just the shock of not holding the narrative anymore? Whatever it was, I silently hoped she saw me, truly saw me, for the first time. Not the version she constructed in her stories, the gloomy sister in black, the killjoy, the background prop. Me, the woman who had always been there, just unseen. I never wanted the spotlight, not as a child, not as an adult. When teachers called for volunteers or candles were lit just for me, I'd always step half a foot back, just enough to stay out of the flame. I never needed people to look. I needed them to see. There's a difference. The spotlight blinds, but truth, it lights things up. My whole life I'd been taught that the only way to deserve love was to be agreeable, polite, small, soft around the edges, to be scenery in someone else's spotlight. But I know better now. I was never too much. They were just too unchallenged in a world that required nothing of them, not even curiosity. I still haven't responded to Haley's texts. Maybe I will, maybe I won't. But if I do, it won't be for her comfort. It'll be for my clarity. I'm not angry. I'm just not reading from your script anymore. That's the thing about truth. It doesn't shout or plead. It just sits there, steady, waiting for others to finally look up and see it. I think she's beginning to. Jonathan messaged again a few days later. "If I'd known who you really were, I'd never have said those things." I didn't reply, because that was the whole point. He didn't know who I was. He just assumed it didn't matter. A week later, I walked into my chambers and found a plain envelope waiting on my desk. No return address. Inside, a photo. Me at Haley's engagement party. Not posed, not smiling, not framed. Just me, half shadowed beneath the archway, half lit beneath the chandelier. On the back, in looping cursive. "You didn't need the spotlight. You tilted the whole room anyway." No name, no signature. Just silence. And somehow, that silence said everything. In the weeks that followed, I noticed a shift, not from my family, who were still scrambling to recenter themselves, but from others, strangers, colleagues, people who had been watching quietly. A junior clerk pulled me aside to ask how I stayed grounded after years of being ignored in courtrooms. A legal intern left a note on my desk. No name, just neat handwriting. "My mom cried watching that clip, said she saw herself in you." One of the court officers, usually silent, stopped me outside Chambers. "My daughter's in med school," he said. Felt like the boring one in the family. "I told her about you." The story had taken on a life of its own, not because I sought attention, but because people saw their own unspoken truths in mine. There's a kind of strength in silence. It isn't emptiness, it's clarity. And I've learned that sometimes the most graceful thing you can do is leave the room, without apology, and let the truth hang in the air like a chime. Because the ones who never really looked, they'll start noticing the outline of what they dismissed. And the ones who've spent years feeling invisible, they'll begin to straighten their backs, not out of spite, but because someone finally held up a mirror. I'm still Vanessa Reed, still the quiet one, still the woman who folds her napkin before rising, still serious in a room that praises loud. But I don't wait for the spotlight anymore. I've realized I was never cold. They just never came close enough to feel the heat. If you've ever been told you're too much or not enough, if you've ever downplayed your success to keep the peace over dinner, if you've ever been treated like a subplot in the story you authored, let this remind you, you don't need permission to take up space. You don't owe silence to people who never asked, "Who are you, really?" And you don't have to make yourself smaller so others feel secure. Show up whole. Speak when it matters. And remember, sometimes the boldest thing you'll ever say is quietly, "That's not correct."